"Can I fix it for food?" They mocked, not knowing he was a legend in motorsports. The late morning sun beat mercilessly on the asphalt in front of Premium Motors. Inside, the air smelled of burnt oil, grease, and urgency. Impact wrenches hammered, voices overlapped in an impatient chorus, and a silver Mercedes occupied the central bay like a patient hard to diagnose. Its owner, young, elegant, but with anxiety etched on her face, clutched her purse to her chest like a lifeline. The mechanics came and went, sweaty, no longer confident in their own attempts. It was in this scene that Rogerio appeared. Torn t-shirt, worn-out pants, stubble on his face, dust on his shoulders, and old weariness on his features. Yet in his eyes, a spark that didn't match the rest. He paused at the door for a second, as if asking permission to exist, then walked slowly through the shop, sidestepping a tool cart and a sideways glance. "Can I help you?" The question came dry from one of the mechanics, Bruno, tall, sweaty, with a black smudge on his cheek. Rogerio nodded, humble. "Let me try to fix this car, in exchange for a sandwich." The laughter didn't come from just one place. It spread like wildfire. Roberto, the youngest, was already pulling out his phone. Claudio lowered his eyes, unwilling to join in but too timid to defend him. The Mercedes owner, tense, watched. Between bursts of laughter, someone threw in, "Buddy, this is a Mercedes, not a horse cart." And the laughter doubled. Rogerio held his ground. He didn't snap back. He just swallowed hard, like swallowing an entire past, and spoke again with a politeness almost out of place in that environment. "Just a look. If I can't fix it, I'll leave you alone." The owner, Mariana, as we would later learn, hesitated. The fear of seeming naive wrestled with her desperate wish to see the car running again. She took a deep breath, set her purse on the counter, and against the tide of mockery said, "5 minutes. Just don't touch anything without telling me first." Bruno shrugged, offended, stepping back like saying, "Not my responsibility." Roberto raised his phone higher. Rogerio opened the hood with a calm gesture. Nothing triumphant, more like a doctor asking for silence without words. He rested his hand on the block, closed his eyes for a moment and stood still, listening. The engine noise wasn't loud, it was wrong. A timid irregularity, a polite hiccup. He gave a short, sideways smile, like recognizing an old voice. "You guys changed plugs and filters," he said, not accusing anyone. "Cleaned injectors, checked the pump, but the problem isn't there." Bruno crossed his arms. "Oh yeah? You're gonna tell me you talked to it?" "Almost." Rogerio touched a wiring harness delicately. When the camshaft position sensor sends intermittent signals, the ECU thinks the valve timing is off. It goes into safe mode. Looks mechanical, but it's not. "I need a scanner." Roberto laughed out loud. "A homeless guy teaching us electronic injection. This is gonna be good." Mariana frowned, uneasy. There was something in Rogerio's confidence that broke through the scorn. "We don't have a scanner right now." Claudio stepped in, almost apologizing. "Ours is in for repair." "The shop next door has one," said Rogerio. "If Mr. Fernando's still the owner, he'll lend it to me." "You know Fernando?" Bruno mocked, though a thread of curiosity cracked his arrogance. Rogerio didn't answer. He stepped out, crossed the street under the blazing sun, and came back 2 minutes later with an old but well-kept scanner. Plugging it into the Mercedes, his fingers didn't hesitate, as if the device had once lived in his hand. "Don't touch it," Bruno warned by instinct. "Relax." Rogerio navigated the menus smoothly, silently. The sharp beep of the scanner cut through the sound of tools. Fault code P0340, camshaft position sensor, intermittent signal. Rogerio tilted his head as if saying, "Told you," without words. No celebration. Calmly, he continued, I'll clean the connector, check the ground, and recalibrate the reference parameter. No charge if it doesn't work. If you break something, who pays? Bruno pushed. I'll pay with the sandwich I never got, he replied, and a brief, uneasy silence followed. Mariana nodded firmly. Go ahead. Roberto kept filming but wasn't laughing anymore. The camera angle shifted, less mockery, more curiosity. Claudio shone a flashlight closer. Rogerio pulled the connector, gently blew the dust, scraped a corroded pin with his nail, checked continuity with a borrowed multimeter. His hands didn't tremble. They were hands that knew where to rest, when to press, when to step back. He returned to the scanner, reset the ECU, re-registered the sensor, and looked at Mariana. Start it. Mariana swallowed, turned the key. The engine fired up instantly. No hiccups, no hesitation. It purred like it had been given a second chance. The sound filled the shop, spreading like a warm wave. Conversations died, tools fell silent. Somewhere in the back, a nut hit the floor. Still with her hand on the key, Mariana covered her face with the other. A sob, not from the engine, caught in her throat. Bruno kept his arms crossed, but his posture softened a fraction. Roberto lowered the phone without realizing it was still recording, blinking slowly as if trying to focus on something that had been there all along. How? Bruno tried the word hanging. Rogerio closed the hood gently, like tucking in a child. It's not a miracle. He finally looked at them all. It's listening, letting the car tell you where it hurts. Mariana drove around the block with the revived Mercedes, returned with wet eyes and a firm decision. She pulled folded bills from her purse. You saved me today. Please take this. Rogerio stepped back, almost startled. We agreed on a sandwich. I'll pay for a whole month of sandwiches, she insisted, half laughing, half crying. It's only fair. He paused. Hunger clawed at him. Dignity, wounded countless times, bled quietly. Through the back window of the Mercedes, he caught the reflection of a folded child seat, a silent gut punch. An old image lit up, a yellow hair ribbon, laughter at full speed, a rear-view mirror suddenly empty. His chest ached in a way that wasn't hunger. Just the sandwich, he repeated softly. That's all I asked for. Mariana slowly put the money away and pointed at the bakery on the corner. I'll go myself. As she left, an old man appeared in the doorway of the neighboring shop, giving Rogerio a thumbs up. It was Fernando indeed. Rogerio nodded back, wordless gratitude. You've had training, right? Bruno asked, trying to sound disinterested. Worked with this before? Rogerio shrugged. I've worked on engines. Where? Silence. The right hum of the Mercedes filled the gap. Roberto, still holding his phone, broke his own script. Sorry for laughing. I don't know. Rogerio smiled faintly, the kind that hurt at the edges. I've been called worse. Mariana came back with a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. She handed them over as if offering more than food, offering a place, some respect, a piece of the world. Thank you, really. I'm the one who should thank you for the chance, Rogerio replied, taking the package carefully, as if it might break. He stepped outside to eat on the curb. Across the street, the shiny Premium Motors sign reflected a patch of sky. His hands held the bread with the same care they'd held the scanner. Each bite seemed to wake not only his stomach, but something long asleep inside him. In the shop, the gap between the mechanics and the car filled with questions. Claudio leaned against the bench, thoughtful. Bruno, wrestling with his pride, did the only thing he could, grabbed a rag and cleaned a tool that wasn't dirty. Roberto stopped recording and, unable to watch yet, slipped the phone back in his pocket. Who is this guy? Someone whispered. Rogerio himself didn't seem to want anyone to know. The sidewalk embraced him, heat rising from the asphalt, the smell of bread muffling memories barging through the back door. He breathed deep, closed his eyes a moment, and let the steady hum of the Mercedes enter like a prayer. A healthy engine had always been a place of peace. "If you want," Mariana's voice pulled him back. "If you want to come back tomorrow, I could buy more sandwiches." Rogerio chuckled through his nose, without mockery. "I don't know about tomorrow." "The shop does," Bruno added, surprising himself with his own sincerity. "If you stop by, we'll see." A crooked invitation, but still an invitation. Rogerio nodded without promising. He rose slowly, returned Fernando's scanner, and holding onto a shred of dignity the sandwich couldn't explain, prepared to leave. At the gate, before the world resumed its usual noise, Mariana called out, "What's your name?" He almost said, "I don't have one," almost said, "Doesn't matter." But for some reason, the question tightened a loose screw inside him. "Rogerio." "Rogerio?" "What?" A small pause, heavy with air. "Silva." Mariana repeated it, not knowing why the surname carried such weight. "Rogerio Silva." "Thank you, Rogerio." He waved and left, leaving behind a workshop that, for a moment, had forgotten how to laugh. The Mercedes kept purring right, as if breathing easy, and someone, no one knew who, murmured without irony, "Miracle." Rogerio walked down the street with the rest of the sandwich in his pocket and a discreet tremor in his hands. His body knew the hunger hadn't only been for food. There was another, older one, to be useful, to fix something that wasn't just metal. As he turned the corner, he heard, far off, a child crying and an engine sputtering at some stoplight. The sound entered him like a calling he tried to ignore. He couldn't. And without knowing it yet, the man who had just brought a car back to life was about to give hope, back to someone who couldn't wait. The afternoon heat seemed to weigh on Premium Motors when a black car screeched to a stop in front of the shop. From the vehicle stepped a man in a wrinkled suit, sweat streaming down his forehead. In the back seat, a young woman held a feverish child in her arms. The boy whimpered softly, his face flushed from exhaustion. "For God's sake, someone help me," the father pleaded, his voice choked with urgency. "My son is sick. I need to get him to the hospital, but the car won't run." The mechanics exchanged nervous glances. Bruno, the shop foreman, tried to answer firmly, "Sir, we'll figure it out. But it's a complex problem. It could take hours." "Hours?" the mother cried, already in tears. "He doesn't have hours." From the back of the shop, silent, Rogerio watched. His hands trembled slightly. The child's cries cut through his skin like invisible blades. It was like hearing his own daughter's voice again, all those years ago. That memory burned, an open wound, still alive. He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the urge to turn away. But he couldn't, not this time. "I can try." Rogerio's voice broke through the tension. Everyone turned. The same man in worn-out clothes, still marked by the smell of the street. The father looked at him, skeptical. "You?" Bruno tried to intervene. "This isn't a good idea." But the mother, desperate, grabbed Rogerio's arm, her eyes brimming with tears. "If you can do anything, please." Rogerio drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice. He walked to the car, placed his hand on the hood, and let the engine's sound speak to him, the faltering rhythm, the intermittent sputters. It took only seconds for his eyes to lock on the problem. "The fuel pump is failing," he said, voice calm but firm. "It's not holding pressure. If we don't replace it now, the car won't move." Bruno's eyes widened. "How do you know that without even opening it?" "Experience," Rogerio answered, already asking for tools. Roberto, who once mocked him, pulled out his phone again to record. But this time the tone was different. No scorn, only disbelief. Rogerio worked quickly, his hands steady, sure, as if he had stepped back into the man he once was. Every bolt, every part seemed to obey his touch. In 15 minutes, the new pump was installed. "Start it," he said, stepping back. The father turned the key. The engine came alive smoothly, steady, as if it had never failed. The mother let out a sob of relief. She hugged her son tightly, tears of gratitude soaking Rogerio's shoulder. "How much do we owe you?" the man asked, holding out money. Rogerio shook his head. "Nothing. Just make sure he gets to the hospital safely." The mother, still cradling the boy, touched his face. "You have no idea what you've done for us." Silence fell over the shop. Bruno and the others, once doubtful, now looked at Rogerio with respect. He was no longer just a stranger begging for food. He was a man who, in minutes, had done the impossible. Roberto, phone still raised, murmured, "The world needs to see this." At that moment, without Rogerio knowing, his legend began to take flight. Nay. It was a muggy morning when a red Ferrari slid up to Premium Motors' door. The engine's roar, instead of powerful, sounded frail, sputtering, like a wounded beast. From the car stepped an elegant man, expensive watch gleaming on his wrist, eyes sharp with impatience. "Fix this now." His voice sounded like an order. "I need to present this car to investors today. It's worth millions. I won't accept excuses." Bruno swallowed hard, trying to sound confident. "Of course, Mr. Marcelo. We'll take care of it." But tension quickly thickened in the air. 3 mechanics bent over the engine with no answers. Time passed, the heat rose, and the businessman grew restless. Then a voice, calm yet firm, cut through the noise. "It's the injectors. One of them is clogged." Everyone turned. There was Rogerio, standing in the shadows, his clothes still simple but his eyes steady. Marcelo looked him up and down, incredulous. "And you are someone who can make your car roar again," he replied, tone unchanged. The businessman laughed with contempt. "You're telling me this homeless man knows more than my mechanics?" Mariana, who had returned to the shop that day, stepped in. "He fixed my Mercedes when no one else could. I trust him." Marcelo hesitated, but the thought of his looming presentation outweighed his pride. "Fine, 30 minutes. If you don't solve it, I take my car and sue all of you." Rogerio nodded without fear. He approached the Ferrari as if approaching a relic. His fingers traced the parts with respect, as though greeting old companions. He asked for specific tools no one at Premium Motors owned. That's when Mr. Fernando, the neighbor shop's owner, appeared with a rare set of instruments. "You'll need these," he said, handing them to Rogerio with a knowing smile. A crowd began to gather outside. Curious clients, neighbors, even children passing by stopped to watch. Roberto, of course, was already recording everything. Every move Rogerio made was precise. He removed the faulty injector with care, examined it under the light, and, improvising with isopropyl alcohol and an ultrafine brush, manually cleared the microscopic blockage. The silence was absolute. The ticking of watches sounded louder than the shop itself. Time raced. Marcelo sweated, but Rogerio worked steady, as though running his own race against fate. 12 minutes later, he reinstalled the injector, closed the engine, and stepped back. "Try it now." Marcelo slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the roar. The Ferrari awoke, vibrant, powerful, reborn. The engine answered the throttle with pure force, its sound flooding the street like thunder. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcelo climbed out of the car, stunned. This is unbelievable." He tried to hand Rogerio money, but he only replied, "You already got what you needed. I just wanted to help." It was Mariana who, smiling, whispered, "Maybe you don't realize it, Rogerio, but you're starting to help far more people than you think." As the businessman drove off triumphantly, Roberto showed Bruno his phone screen. "This video's going viral, thousands of views in minutes." And so, with the roar of a Ferrari, Rogerio Golden Hands began to re-emerge to the world. The video of the Ferrari roaring back to life spread across the internet like wildfire. Within a few hours, it was on every social network. The caption Roberto wrote drew attention. "Homeless man brings a Ferrari back to life in minutes." The comments multiplied. "Impossible. This is staged. This guy's got a gift. Look at his hands. I've seen that way of working on an engine before." It was that last line that lit the spark. In the days that followed, more videos of Rogerio surfaced. Mariana's Mercedes, the BMW with the sick boy, and now the Ferrari. The reach was nationwide. People shared, cried, laughed, and wondered, who is this man? Until someone connected the dots. A viral collage started making the rounds. On one side, old photos of Rogerio Silva, three-time Brazilian rally champion, hoisting trophies in the 90s. On the other, recent screenshots of him in the shop, worn clothes, graying beard, but the same steady eyes. And the phrase across the image, "He didn't disappear, he was reborn." At Premium Motors, the routine was shattered by honking and agitated voices. When Bruno looked up, he saw something he'd never seen in his life. 3 news vans parking in front of the shop. Cameras, microphones, photographers. "Now we're in for it," Claudio muttered, nervous. When Rogerio noticed the commotion, he turned pale. His body stiffened as if he'd taken an invisible punch. "No, this can't be," he whispered, feeling his heart race. Doors swung open. Reporters swarmed him, surrounding him. Questions fired like bursts. "Mr. Rogerio Silva, can you confirm you're the 3-time rally champion? Where have you been all these years after the accident that took your family? Is it true you've lived on the streets since then? Why have you never talked to the press?" Rogerio backed up, pressing against the wall like a cornered animal. Memories of the past crushed him. The accident, the flashes, the cruel headlines, the heavy silence of the years that followed. Seeing the desperation in his eyes, Mariana stepped in front of him. "Enough! He's not a spectacle. If you want to talk, make an appointment." But the journalists wouldn't budge. Outside, a crowd of onlookers gathered. Some were long-time fans. Others just wanted to witness the rebirth up close. Handwritten signs started popping up with phrases like, "Welcome back, Golden Hands. We never forgot you." Bruno tried to shut the gate, but before he could, a voice rang out. "Rogerio, you saved me in 1998 when I rolled over in Campos do Jordão. You stopped the race to pull me out of the car." Another voice chimed in. "My son was your fan. He passed away last year, but he always said you were his hero." The crowd began to sing the old jingle from Rogerio's racing days. The sound filled the air like a chorus of memories. Inside the shop, Rogerio collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "I don't want this. I just wanted to fix engines. I just wanted not to feel empty anymore." Mariana knelt beside him, steady. "Rogerio, maybe this is your chance. The world isn't here to judge. It's here because you touched lives, because your story proves it's possible to start over." He lifted tearful eyes and, for the first time in years, smiled through the tears. A fragile smile, but real. And when he looked back at the crowd through the crack in the gate, he realized it wasn't the cameras or the journalists that mattered. It was those ordinary people, folks who recognized themselves in his pain and found hope in his fight. In that instant, Rogerio Golden Hands understood he could no longer hide. After the avalanche of cameras, microphones, and voices that crashed into his life, Rogerio felt there was no way back to anonymity. His identity was exposed. The entire country knew the man fixing cars for food was the missing 3-time rally champion. For days, he wrestled with the exposure. He wanted to run, to hide, but something held him in place. It wasn't the journalists, it was the letters that began to arrive. Notes from young people struggling with addiction. "If you manage to get back up, maybe I can too." Messages from indebted parents. "I can't afford a shop, but your video gave me hope that good people still exist. Even messages from former fans. I was a kid shouting your name at the races. Today, I shout because you showed me life can start again. Those words hurt and healed at the same time. Mariana noticed, Rogerio, you need to turn this into something. It can't just be internet fame. It has to become something real. She took the first step. She invested resources, called business friends, sought political support. Bruno, Claudio, and Roberto threw themselves into the idea without a second thought. A few months later, an old building was renovated. At the inauguration, the golden plaque at the entrance gleamed. Elias Navarro Center, Hands That Transform. The name was a tribute to Mariana's father who, like Rogerio, had battled alcoholism and lost almost everything. For her, the center was also a form of redemption. The building had 3 floors. On the first, a social auto shop. Families without means could bring their cars and leave with dignity and safety. On the second, a rehab center for people with substance use disorders, with volunteer doctors and therapists. On the third, a technical school so underprivileged youth could learn a trade. On opening day, the place was packed. Formerly homeless people, humble families, curious business owners, journalists, even old colleagues from Motorsports. When Rogerio stepped onto the makeshift stage to speak, his hands trembled, not from withdrawal, but from emotion. 2 years ago, I was living under an overpass, he began, voice tight. Lost, destroyed, believing there was no way out. Absolute silence. But I discovered falls aren't endings, they're chances to start again. And today, I'm not opening a center with my name to seek glory. I'm opening a place where no one will be abandoned, where engines, lives, and dreams can be repaired. He pulled a crumpled photo of his daughter Ana Beatriz from his pocket and held it up for all to see. This center is for her, and for everyone who needs to believe it's never too late. The crowd erupted in applause. People cried, hugged strangers, stood and cheered. The emotion was collective, almost tangible. In that moment, Rogerio understood he was no longer just golden hands. Now he was hands that transform. And for the first time since the accident, he felt peace. The keys at the Elias Navarro Center, Hands That Transform, had become a point of hope in the city. Humble families had a place to fix their cars, aimless youth found technical training, and people struggling with addiction had access to dignified treatment. But the more the center grew, the more the world's eyes turned to Rogerio. And along with admiration came doubts. Isn't this just a PR stunt? Can a former alcoholic driver really run something this big? He's going to relapse, isn't he? Those questions echoed on social media, in newspapers, in the halls of power. Rogerio pretended not to care, but each word was like a nail driven into his mind. The test arrived as an emergency. On a rainy afternoon, a black SUV pulled up in front of the center. Out stepped Dr. Enrique, the attorney whose car Rogerio had fixed months earlier so he could take his son to the hospital. Now his face was drawn, eyes red with exhaustion. Rogerio, I need you again. He explained. He was defending a humble family against a millionaire businessman accused of running over and killing a young woman while driving drunk. The witnesses, afraid of retaliation, would only agree to testify if they could meet safely that night. But on the way to pick them up, Enrique's armored car had broken down. The clock was merciless, 6 hours to go before the meeting that could decide the case. Rogerio popped the hood, listened to the engine, and immediately saw how serious it was. It would normally be a days-long repair, but there were no days. He took a deep breath and said, "Then we'll do it in hours." He called Bruno, Claudio, Roberto, and even Mariana to help. The entire center mobilized. It was like a field surgery, parts stripped, oil everywhere, sweat dripping down faces. Rogerio wasn't just fixing, he was conducting an orchestra. Bruno muttered, "This is crazy." "We won't make it." And Rogerio answered firmly, "When someone's life depends on you, we won't make it doesn't exist." The hours flew like minutes. 5 p.m., 6 p.m. The deadline squeezed tighter. Rogerio was exhausted, his hands shaking, but he didn't stop. His mind dragged him back to the accident that took his wife and daughter. In the eyes of the family, counting on justice, he saw a reflection of his own pain. He would not fail again. At 6:50 p.m., with 10 minutes left, the last bolt was tightened. "Start it now," Rogerio said hoarsely. Enrique turned the key. The engine roared, clean and strong. Perfect. The attorney broke down in tears, hugging Rogerio. "You didn't just fix the car. You just gave me the chance to save an entire family." Enrique rushed out, and Rogerio, sweaty and spent, leaned on the bench. Silence fell over the center. Then Bruno said what everyone was thinking. "Rogerio, what you did isn't mechanics, it's a miracle." But Rogerio only smiled, eyes glassy. "No, Bruno, it's just believing there's still something worth saving." Hours later, the news arrived. The witnesses testified, the case gained strength, and for the first time, the rich, drunken businessman would be brought to trial. The whole country rejoiced, and with it came confirmation. Rogerio wasn't just a legend of the past. He was a living symbol that redemption is possible. The morning sun glinted off the freshly installed golden plaque, Elias Navarro Center, Hands That Transform. In front of the building, a crowd gathered. Former clients, families who'd received help, young people now dreaming of a different future. There were journalists, onlookers, business people, but above all, there were ordinary people, all drawn by the same reason, to celebrate a new beginning. Rogerio watched in silence. He'd never imagined he'd get there. Not long ago, he saw himself lost, hiding under an overpass, convinced there was no way out. Now, this place pulsed as living proof that second chances exist. Inside the center, 3 floors told his new story. On the first, the free shop, where cars from humble families were cared for at no cost. On the second, the rehab clinic, where people fought addiction with support from professionals and former patients. On the third, the technical school, where underprivileged youth learned a trade, and with it, dignity. And every detail, every brick, carried the weight of his promise. Never again turn his back on someone who needed help. Bruno, Claudio, and Roberto were there, side by side, now part of a family fate had stitched together. Mariana, steady as ever, came over and handed him a bouquet of white flowers. He smiled, moved, the same flowers he always laid on his daughter's grave. When the mayor announced his name into the microphone, the crowd gave a standing ovation. Rogerio took a deep breath, climbed onto the makeshift stage, and looked out at the hundreds of expectant faces. His hands, the same hands that had once held trophies and also bottles of cheap liquor, trembled. But not from fear, they trembled with life. His voice came out firm, surprising even himself. 2 years ago, I was lost, living on the streets, believing my life was over. But some people showed me that falls aren't the end of the story. They're opportunities to start over better. Mariana's tear-filled eyes confirmed every word. Today I understand that a man's worth isn't in what he lost, but in what he chooses to build after the loss. From his pocket, he took out his daughter's crumpled photo. He raised it carefully, like a trophy. "This center is my greatest title, not in racing, but in life, and it's dedicated to her, Ana Beatriz, who taught me the most important truth. The greatest trophy anyone can win is helping other people." Silence held for a second before the crowd exploded into applause and tears. It was a sound unlike any podium victory, deeper, more human, more lasting. Rogerio breathed deeply, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in many years, he was no longer the broken man trying to survive the past. He was the man who fixed hearts, who turned pain into hope, and as he looked around he saw young people smiling, families giving thanks, people believing again. Right then he knew for sure, no matter how far you fall, it's always possible to start over. And when you start over by helping others, you discover something far greater than titles or trophies. In that instant, Rogério Silva understood. His greatest victory wasn't in rallies, nor on tracks, nor in the glory of other times. His greatest victory was learning to repair lives. And so, the man who was once humiliated for asking for a sandwich became living proof that, in the right hands, even pain can be transformed into love. If you believe it's always possible to start over, drop a heart in the comments. Your like and subscription help this message reach those who need it most.